All right, so the assignment is to preach for 10 minutes about my personal theology for 10 minutes and to use a single concept, which is a challenging thing to think about your own personal theology and encapsulate it in one concept and speak about it for 10 minutes. It could be quite extensive. But luckily for you guys, I have condensed it. I thought about it quite a bit, down to 2 words. And I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, we're busy people. Could you please make it 1 word, 2 words? I can't sit through 2 words. It's too long. Or can you make it one of those contracted things so we can text it? No. In order to give my personal theology its full due, I need to use both words in their entirety. So those 2 words are free hugs. You may need some context for this. A few years ago, when the Occupy movement began, when they were actually occupying spaces, my wife and I took our daughters to Occupy Los Angeles. And at the same time, there was a trend for people to walk out into congested spaces and, train stations or wherever else. I don't know if you guys remember this, and have a sign that says free hugs. It was, now we'd call it a meme. It was a trend at the time, excuse me. Coughing a little. And I thought about this because there was a person with a sign that said free hugs at this Occupy movement. And I thought, and it was all on the news. These are hugs people are giving to another human being. Why should this be newsworthy? This is something we should be giving to each other. We should be connecting on this human level. This shouldn't be new with every human being, whether you know them or not. And not necessarily a physical hug. Not everybody can commit to a physical hug for whatever reason. But open yourselves up, express yourselves, connect with that vulnerability, with that human connection to each and every person. This should be something that is not newsworthy when someone does it. And not only is it newsworthy because it's free, because they're giving hugs, but he has to say free. It was a male. They have to say free on there. And I'm thinking, of course they're free. But in our Western consumerist culture, society, you have to specify that even something like a hug, no, we're not going to charge you for it, because that might be the consideration. And I'm thinking, these are hugs. There's not a culture. There's not a tradition. There's not a theological discipline. There's not an ethnicity. There's no one on earth that would even consider charging for a hug. I mean, and not every culture actually does hug physically. I'm talking about whatever their equivalent of a hug is, whatever that connection, however that's made within different cultures, no one would say they're going to charge for a hug. You could be on both sides of the line, whatever it's called, when you fight a war. I don't know what that's called. The border, yes. And if you gave someone a hug, they're not going to say, can I have some money for it? You know what I'm saying? It's just not something you conceivably can charge for in any culture. Yet, this person felt the need to say free hugs. And it was newsworthy to give hugs. I'm just gonna, it turned off. So I thought to myself, okay, we're at the Occupy movement. This is a chance for me to make a statement about this. This is a chance for me, I like to use humor, at least attempt to, and try and make a statement. So I made my own sign at this Occupy movement, and this is really true. And my sign had a big heart on it, and it said, free hugs with any purchase of an equivalent hug of equal or lesser value, or a deluxe hug package. Because I just wanted to show the consumerist culture that there's so many things we do that we should be giving out of loving kindness that we're expecting a return for. That's the automatic assumption. What do I get back from this? Why should I do this? What's the benefit to me? What's my remuneration, financial or emotional or otherwise? And so I made this statement, and I had the deluxe hug package and the semi-hug package and the various levels of hugs, and we'll compete with anyone and match your price if you bring a receipt for their hug package, and we have all of our huggers are antimicrobial and all of this stuff. just to make this point of this consumerist culture with this thing that should just always be given for free. Now, there's two things about hugs. Not only is it something that you're giving without condition, without expectation of reciprocation, you're giving it for someone. Now, you may get a hug back, and you probably will. But the ideal hug isn't giving in order to get, it's giving to give. That's one aspect of a hug. You're giving without condition. The other aspect is consent. When you give a hug, you don't just go and grab somebody. You have to get their consent. Do you need a hug? Do you want a hug? And sometimes giving the hug is not giving the hug at all, is giving them space. That's the emotional connection. That's the giving of yourself, being vulnerable, is knowing that that's what they need. So that can be a hug too. Hugs can come in all different forms. And I started thinking, wait a minute, when I'm in everyday communication with people, when I'm at work, when we're arguing, when the left side and the right side of the Democrats and this and that are arguing in contentious points, this is not going to get us heard. This isn't going to connect us. This will. And physically hugging or emotionally, psychologically, spiritually hugging the other person while we continue to argue our side, then and only then might we be heard. And without the expectation to be heard, just the expectation to give to the other person. We were talking about my daughter earlier. My daughter is bothered by my digging. And she's bothered by many other things I do because she's a teenager and I'm her dad. And so instead of being frustrated with it, which I am internally, instead of being strict about it, I just think about in a way, what can I do in this moment that is essentially a free hug for her? Of course, that's not what she wants, but what is something that will ask her, how can I ask her what she needs in this moment, give it to her without requiring something in return, and at the same time being open and being vulnerable to possibly, considerably being hurt. A hug can be uncomfortable. You are putting yourself in a position that can be uncomfortable. And then I said, throughout my day, I can start thinking in my interactions with people as I move through life, as we progress in our lives, every single thing I do, is this thing a hug? And if it is, why am I not giving it for free? Why am I expecting something to come back to me if it's ideally a hug? And if it's not a hug, maybe it should be. Maybe I can do it differently so that I'm vulnerable, so that I'm giving of myself, so that I'm asking for consent. Maybe I can do this as a hug. So every single thing in my life, I consider, how can this be a free hug? And when I think about it that way, as a hug, then I realize how ridiculous it is to be constantly needing the other person to give to me if I'm going to give to them. To be constantly wanting or expecting. And now you may think, well, if you're constantly giving of yourself, or I, sometimes consider, then maybe I'm just going to get stepped on and pushed over and run over. I'm not suggesting that. You can run a nonprofit and still get a salary. But if the salary is the reason you're there, you're not doing the work as a hug, as a free hug. If the salary is the reason you're there, then that's not going to be effective work. If the mission is your passion and you're really doing it, you're being vulnerable and you're giving of yourself, and then you get the salary because you need to support your family and that's peripheral, then you're doing it as a hug. Then you're doing it as a free hug. So I'm just reframing everything in my life, and that's what I thought about for my personal philosophy, reframing everything as a hug and now a free hug. And I honestly believe, and from my experience, I've actually experienced this, that I get so much more back doing it this way than I ever got doing things with the expectation of getting something back. So that's my personal philosophy my personal theology, free hugs as it stands. Of course, it's in development, it's in flux, as all theologies should be. But to conclude, I just want to say, I'm here if anyone needs a hug.
Thank you.